The Honourable Annette Finch.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they are very proud of this bill. We've heard this repeatedly in their 1 minute and 27-second speeches.
That's what they call working.
We heard it again in the second reading in their 1 minute and 40-second speeches. We heard it again with the "I move that the question be put" speeches during the committee stages. And now we've had another 1 minute speech in support of this bill from the backbench of the National Party. Unfortunately for this House, it started off with the Minister who has bailed out of the debate before it's finished. And she started off this debate by saying that the government had started a vicious program of reforms. And I said, yes, she's right on one thing. She has started a vicious program of reforms. And we now know what they are. There's been a series of major changes to housing policy under this government. Every one of them takes State House tenants backwards. Every one of them leaves State House tenants unsure as to whether tomorrow they will still have a roof over their head. I said at the beginning of this debate that I believe this was a series of ideological burps by this government. In other words, a lot of hot air and gas wrapped up in their biased and unbalanced philosophy that the National Party hold dear. And so I believe that we've gone from Nick Smith, who's been a great exponent of this sort of philosophy, to Paula Bennett. And Paula Bennett, in her wake, has left a trail of destruction in government departments. Go out and see what you find in the WINS offices around New Zealand now and see what the morale is like after 3 years of her stewardship. She's now moved on to Housing New Zealand. And what we find out in this bill, hidden in this bill, in the remedial matters part of it, is that she's removing any advice from Housing New Zealand on policy. Did the members opposite know that? Were they aware that she was removing any advice that would come from Housing New Zealand? And the member at the back, the list member from the back, Brett Hudson, who has not bothered to contribute to the debate except from his seat, sitting down, ought to go and have a real look at this bill instead of just being a parrot for the notes that they're given. In fact, we've got a whole backbench of parrots who haven't taken the time to read what this bill does. They didn't take the time to ask questions of their minister. They just said, "We are so proud, Minister, of your bill." I actually think that they're not earning their salaries today because they're not working and questioning and debating this bill that they ought to be doing. You know, the people of New Zealand were given a solemn promise by the Prime Minister of this country that there would be no more asset sales. And what we know from this bill and from the other actions that this government has taken is that the biggest asset sale you can have is taking place now. There would not be a member opposite or on this side of the House who would not think that a house is the biggest asset any of us could ever have. Our house, whether we own it or whether we rent and live in it and cherish it, is the best and biggest asset we have. And to say that selling off thousands of state houses is not an asset sale is to be being very economical with the truth. And that is what this government has been with this bill. You see, it's been set up. It was set up over 3 years ago when they became the government. And the first wave of changes came to state houses. And it followed a pattern, and I set that pattern out in the first reading of this bill. And I think it's worth repeating because every constituency member on this side of the House knows the pattern. First of all, the people are taken out of the state houses. Isn't that what happened out in your electorate, our Chief Whip? Isn't that what happened in other parts, whether it is in Te Atatu or whether it's in Rongotai? People are removed from the houses. That's the first thing that happens. All sorts of reasons why they need to be removed. Secondly, they then say, no one wants to live in these houses. Look, they're empty. Nobody wants these houses. And all the while, the waiting list for state houses was growing and growing and growing. These houses were empty. They said nobody wanted to live in them. and the waiting lists in those areas were growing. So then the next excuse is, well, these houses must be in the wrong place and the wrong size. So if they're the wrong place and the wrong size, we should sell them to the community sector, and they'd be able to put people in the houses that are in the wrong place and the wrong size. You see, it's nonsensical. It doesn't make sense to then want us flog them off to whoever will buy them, because they're going to be used for community housing. If they can't be used for community housing by the government agency, why does the government think that a community organisation is going to turn them into the right house, the right place and the right size? And then you then get to the next part of this process. When you leave houses empty, just go around and look at empty state houses. What you will find is suddenly the windows start to be broken. Then you have vandalism around graffiti, written on the walls, written on the houses. Then you see the boards go up as Housing New Zealand tries to cover up the broken windows. And then you get the complaints about what it's doing in a neighbourhood. Why are these houses looking so unsightly in a neighbourhood? And then it gets to the final stage of all. The government says, well, we've got to sell them off. We've got to get rid of them. And that has been the process that we have watched take place since this party became the government. Cynical, manipulative movement in state houses to get rid of houses, whether they are all the best houses or not. We would not have objected if they were being replaced by other houses. That is not the history of a National Party. They sold off 13,000 when they were last in government, and they are now on the big State House sell-off again. So then we thought, if this party can't look carefully at the legislation and the backbench is too lazy to get out of their seats other than to make 27-second speeches, that we ought to look closely at it. And many of us go straight to the regulatory impact statement. You see, it's provided for a reason. It's provided to tell us, members of Parliament in this House, what other eyes have seen when they've looked at the legislation. Always worthwhile, I say to new backbenchers, go and read any regulatory impact statement. We've seen some very good ones over the years. I can think of the regulatory impact statement that was put out on that care of adults who are disabled. Remember that one? When we got that regulatory impact statement, Tony Ryle had it all redacted. On the day we were debating the bill, you couldn't even read what they were saying. Well, we've got one on this bill, Mr. Speaker. And what we found out was there has been no review, no evaluation, no reports on this legislation. First issue, what does it say? Has there been any? The big question is one big fat no. There has been no reviews or evaluation of this policy. The second one I think is important is that Treasury did not provide any independent opinion on the quality of this legislation. Two fundamental things that happen. Is it evaluated? Have they got advice? Are there reports? What has Treasury said about it? On both those counts, the National Party did not get advice. They know best. They know exactly what people need in New Zealand. It's what they want. It's not what people necessarily want, it's what they want. So I say to the Member's Office, after you pass this bill, because you haven't taken the time to read these statements now, haven't taken the time to question whether there's anything in these bills that ought to have a closer scrutiny, I suggest come to the table, pick up the documents and at least learn a lesson from this bill. Learn a lesson that you don't just become the rubber stamp for your ministers, because you're not going to go far in a political career when you just become a rubber stamp for a minister. And I say to the C team, except Mr Bishop, that you have become rubber stamps for the minister who has hoodwinked you into thinking that a bill that does not have to be passed with urgency, that they've been undertaking parts of it for the last 4 years, that you're going to need to pass this and you just need to rubber stamp it. Well, I say to the members opposite, you are not doing the job that you're elected to do if you're not scrutinising the legislation that is put before this House. So I say to the members opposite, shame on them. This bill should have gone to a select committee. It should have had submissions. It should have had the input from the people of New Zealand so they could have a say. State houses are their assets, not the government's. Good speech.